Hey everyone, have you been told that you have issues with word choice in your writing before? Well, if you have, it's really not that easy to figure out or fix, despite what some people might say to you. And they might say, oh, it's just about tone. You're using informal language when you need to use formal language, or the other way around. Word choice for non-native speakers, when they have a word choice issue with their writing, it's so much more than just the tone. So I'm going to talk about what those issues are and some tips on how to avoid them. So first, let's talk about what types of word choice issues non-native speakers of English and even some native speakers of English make when they're writing for academic English. The first one is that they might make a mistake with the form of the word. They might choose a noun instead of an adjective. That's a word choice issue. The second one is that sometimes they choose a word that sounds like another word, but it's spelled a different way and it actually is a different word. So words like accept and accept, they sound the same, but they have totally different meanings. Another issue is with collocations. Collocations are words that often go together with other words. For example, we say interested in, not interested on. So a lot of times students will make mistakes using the wrong collocation. That's a word choice issue. Another big one for students that I work with is that they use a word that requires an object after it, but they don't put the object after it. Or sometimes they'll put an object after a word that doesn't require an object. And we'll talk about that. Another big one, of course, is articles, a, an, and the. Those ones are really hard, but they are very rule-based, and you can use and learn those rules and learn how to use them correctly. The problem with articles is that there are so many idiomatic expressions with articles that break the rules, and then we need to kind of learn those over time. And those can cause word choice issues. Although I will say, if you miss an article or a preposition or something like that, every once in a while, it's not going to cause a huge deal of misunderstanding. And finally, the last word choice issue that most writers make is the tone issue. And that is, instead of saying something formal in an academic writing sense, they'll use a more informal word. So we're going to talk about all of these 7 different types of issues and sort of give you some tips on how to avoid them. And I want to point out, English is a language that has a lot of words. Most people who grow up speaking English have a vocabulary of 20 to 30,000 words by the time they're an adult. So it's very common, expected, and normal for someone learning English as an adult to make mistakes with word choice. But I always recommend reading, speaking, engaging in the language, and that's a great way to learn. But I will go over those 6 types of word choice errors that I just mentioned right now. The first type of error that I see, and probably the easiest one to explain because this is not easy, is that students will use the wrong form of a word. So instead of using the adjective form, they'll use the noun. What do I mean by that? Let me show you an example. Look at this sentence. Some students use too much repetitive in their writing. Repetitive is not correct in this case because repetitive is an adjective. We need a noun. So we need to say, some students use too much repetition in their writing. How do you know when to use repetitive and when to use repetition? Study the parts of speech. Make sure you know what a noun is, a verb, an adjective, an adverb, and understand their functions within a sentence. And then over time, you will avoid these errors too. Another type of word form error that I see with the noun, adjective, verb, that kind of thing is when we're looking at participle adjectives. A participle adjective is an adjective, but it looks like a verb. It has an ed or an ing at the end. Like this. The students are very excited about this weekend. That's the correct use of excited. It's an adjective. It describes the students. We can't say the students are very exciting about this weekend. We can't say that. It's not correct, but this is a very common word choice error I'm seeing often in my students' writing. And all it takes is to understand when to use the ed or the ing on a participle adjective. And I'll just say quickly, the ed is used when we want to describe the effect of the feeling someone has, right? So I felt excited, interested, bored. But when you want to describe the cause, you use ing. So the movie was exciting. The movie was interesting. The movie was boring. Those are the causes, so they take ing. The second common issue that I mentioned earlier is that students make mistakes with word choice when there's very commonly confused words. They sound the same. Sometimes they are spelled the same, but they have different meanings, okay? So let me show you some examples of those. Look at this. To accept and accept. If I'm talking quickly, they sound exactly the same. If you know there's one with an A and one with an E, X, if you know what they mean and you know how to use them, you won't make that mistake. Or look at this, advice and advise. They actually don't sound the same. They sound similar, but students get them mixed up. One's a noun, one's a verb. Okay, I'm going to go down here. Look at this, hear and hear, right? One means to hear, it's a verb, to receive sound, and one means location, right here, okay? So I recommend going through, Googling, YouTubing, looking up commonly confused words or commonly misspelled words. The next issue that I see with word choice is with collocations. Collocations are words that often go together, like pairs, okay? And because these are not rule-based, there's no rule for these, they cause a lot of issues, okay? So let me just give you some examples. Look, I need to do the bed. To do the bed? No, I need to make the bed. I need to make the bed. That's what we say. She gave me a promise. No, she didn't give me a promise. She made me a promise. These are collocations. Or words like this with prepositions. We use adjectives and prepositions that are collocations. So I'm absent from class. Not I'm absent to, I'm absent at. No, I'm absent from. Disappointed with you. I'm disappointed with that. We don't say I'm disappointed at, I'm disappointed to, I'm disappointed from, okay? So this is a good list to know and be aware of, but if you're reading and you're speaking English, you're hearing these constructions, you're hearing these collocations, and with enough exposure, you will also get them, but I want to draw your attention to these because they are very, very common. Another list that I think you should be aware of are the collocations with verbs and prepositions, like agree with, believe in, escape from, look forward to, respond to, take care of. These are some more common collocations that just help to know them. All right, the next type of issue that I see in students writing with word choice is when they have an object, when they need to use an object after a word, or when they don't need to use an object, but they do anyway. An object just means noun, and a noun just means person, place, thing, idea. Noun can also be a gerund, which is a verb, like an activity, right? Like walking, talking. Nouns could even be infinitives, to walk, to talk. And another type of object can be a pronoun. Pronouns are words that replace nouns like he, she, they, ours, yours, okay? Now, I see issues with this because when we're using the passive voice, we need to have an object after a verb. We cannot use the passive voice if the verb we're using doesn't have an object. We also need to be careful with objects when we're talking and writing with phrasal verbs. Some phrasal verbs, which are two-word verbs, like turn on the light. Some phrasal verbs require an object, some don't, okay? And also, it really helps to know which form of an object to use gerund versus infinitive when we're using verbs that have an activity after them, like I love talking. When you're using verbs that you want to use a noun after, like I eat. What? I eat cake. I eat cookies. Those are objects. They're nouns. But you can also use activities or verbs after certain verbs, like I enjoy. I enjoy grammar. I enjoy rules. Those are nouns. But we can also say I enjoy reading, or I enjoy to read. No, that's not correct. Okay, so let me show you what I mean here. Be careful with certain verbs where you want to use an activity after. For example, I enjoy to study rules is not correct. You can't say I enjoy to study, because after the word enjoy, you need to use the gerund form, not the infinitive form. You need to say I enjoy studying rules. After enjoy, you need a gerund. Be careful with that. That's a big one, and it takes a long time, and this rule is very involved. But that's basically it, is be careful with the object that you're using after certain verbs. Sometimes you need a gerund, sometimes you need an infinitive when you are trying to express an activity after a verb. Also, when you want to show an activity after adjectives, we use infinitives. That makes it easy. I'm happy. That's an adjective. I'm happy to help you. Infinitive. You can't say I'm happy helping you. I'm happy to help you. I was too upset to speak. Upset's the adjective. I was too upset to speak. We don't say I was too upset speaking. Okay? I mean, if you do, the meaning changes. After nouns, if you want to use an activity, then you need an infinitive. It's time. It's time for what? It's time to go. It's time to go. We don't say it's time going. Also, after prepositions, in, on, about, between, over, you always need to use a gerund. I'm opposed to working all night. We're excited about graduating. We don't say we're excited about to graduate, okay? Now, I also mentioned that when we are using certain words, sometimes we have to have an object, and sometimes we don't have to have an object. So in this case, this is called the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs. Now, you don't need to remember those words. You just need to know that some verbs require an object. They have to have an object after them because they're transitive. For example, I'm going to build. Build what? I'm going to build a box. Okay, you have to have an object. I'm going to find. Find what? Find is a transitive verb, but you must have an object. I'm going to find my keys. But other verbs are intransitive. That just means they don't have to have an object. Words like agree. I agree, period. That's correct. You don't have to say I agree, Tom. I agree, you. We say I agree. If you want to say who you agree with, you could say I agree with you. That's fine, but that's not an object. That's a preposition. So be careful and be aware of the verbs that require objects. So words like build, cut, find, like, make, need, send, use, want, those are transitive. Agree, arrive, come, cry, exist, go, happen, live, occur, reign, rise, sleep, stay. Those are intransitive. And then other verbs are transitive and intransitive, okay? Now, this is important because when we want to make a sentence in the passive voice, for example, I can say, I read the book. That's an active sentence. But I could also make it passive and say the book was read. Okay, that's passive. You can only do that with verbs that have objects after them. Look at this sentence. An earthquake happened. An earthquake happened. Okay, that's an active voice sentence. Is there an object after the verb happen? An earthquake happened. No. So you cannot make that passive voice, but a lot of people do. They'll say, an earthquake was happened. Can't do that because you can't make a sentence passive voice if the verb doesn't have an object after it. So going back again to this difference between transitive and intransitive verbs. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next type, and the next type is of word choice error that I see are errors with articles that involve idiomatic expression. So an idiomatic expression just means something that's not literal, meaning the word does not refer to the actual meaning of the word. The meaning of the word doesn't refer to the word. It's figurative, meaning that these words represent something other than their literal meaning. So expressions like this, I'm going to give you a hand with that. I'm not going to give you my hand. I'm going to help you. That's what it means. But in this idiomatic expression, you got to be careful with the hand. I'm going to give you a hand. We don't say I'm going to give you my hand, even though that would make sense. We say I'm going to give you a hand. Or when you're writing and you say on the other hand, why isn't it on a hand or on other hand? It's on the other hand. These are idiomatic expressions that cause students a lot of trouble, despite the fact that article rules are very rule-based. A, an, and the have very clear rules. They're very hard, especially when we throw in all these exceptions with idiomatic expressions, words like go to the store, go to the bank, but we don't go to the school, we go to school, right? Or I'm at school, I'm at home, I'm in bed, but I'm at the hospital, in American English at least. Mow the lawn, do the dishes, do the cleaning, right? Why don't we say do cleaning? We say do the cleaning, okay? In the morning, in the evening, in the night? No, at night. So these are some of those ones that I'm talking about. Finally, the last one is the issue with tone. Now, tone is meaning, are you using the right words and language in the situation you are involved in? If you're writing for a college paper, you should use academic tone. If you're talking to your friends, you could use casual tone. If you're talking to your grandparents, you might not use the same words that you use with your friends, right? So be careful with that, because when we write for an academic paper in the same way that we talk to our friends, the tone may come off as informal and not okay. For example, you might say to your friends, oh my gosh, my teacher is so extra. But you wouldn't write that in a paper for school. You would say, my teacher is very involved and very intricate and very detailed, and however you want to describe. Also, if you want to keep your tone academic in papers, I can give you some suggestions, and that is try not to use words like really or totally or definitely. Try not to say a lot all the time. Try not to use really emotionally charged language. Try not to use slang. Try not to use contractions like must have. You would say must have. Try not to use the word you. When you speak directly to the reader, it comes off as informal, because that's how we talk, right? You know what I'm talking about. That's how we talk. But when we're writing, we don't say, you know what I mean. We'll say, people know what I mean. Okay? So those are just some tips for keeping your word tone choice in check for academic writing. Okay, so I hope that this video helped you. Thanks for watching.